Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're happy and well. I have this quirk that when I get really invested in a piece of media, I really want something tangible from it. Whether it be a book, a game, a movie, a TV show, if the story really mattered to me, I want to have something from that universe in my life, which is what inspired this project. I, like millions of others, played and enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3, but truth be told, I'm no cosplayer, but I do like knickknacks. So today I'm going to tell you how I made a gilded chest from Baldur's Gate 3. I started off using reference photos from the game. The first obvious hurdle is making the chest's unusual shape. The other thing I decided right away is that I didn't need or want my chest to be as big as it would be in real life. I was quite happy with a little weenie one. I of course don't need to find any boots or anything in it. So the first step is to draw a net. A net is the flat shape before you fold it into a three-dimensional shape. It took some measuring, angles, geometry, and maths to figure it out, but this is what I came up with. I decided to make mine about 18 centimeters or 7 inches wide. And I've decided for the purpose of this video, I won't explain the measurements too much, just how I did it. I think it would be fairly easy to follow if you wanted to make it for yourself. After cutting out the net, it should make this shape. This is the bottom, and this is the lid. I cut the whole chest out of a hard cardboard for better structure. And then it should look like this, once it's folded on all the dotted lines and sticky taped the sides together. The next hurdle is the legs of the chest. As you can see from the wiki photo, the legs of the chest are slightly curved, which is a bit tricky to make work with paper and cardboard. After a bit of trial and error, this is eventually what the net of the chest legs looks like. The last thing you need is a little table sort of thing. The legs should be able to slip onto the table like little boots, and the tabletop is the same size as the base of the chest. Next is to draw out the design of the chest. The design on the lid is like two symmetrical moons back to back, with some swirls amongst and around it. To be able to make this design symmetrical and fit within the measurements of the chest, I recommend drawing it on grid paper. For my first attempt at this, I used various circular lids to copy the swirly moon shape. I also forgot to leave room for the golden borders around the edges of the chest, so I added those in on my second attempt. After that, I cut out the design while it was folded in half, so that it would be perfectly symmetrical when it was opened up. The design on the box of the chest is like fangs with a swirly swoop underneath. I drew this design on grid paper as well, and it was much easier to copy than the lid design. The sides of the lid are easier again. That is just a long diamond with two triangles at the sides. I also freehand drew the lock catch. I drew half of it on grid paper, then opened the paper out and traced the other side to make it symmetrical. Of course, the lock doesn't do anything. I wouldn't even know how to make it do anything, it's purely decorative. To make the edges of the chest, these golden parts that hold the chest together, I cut out dozens of strips of cardboard, either 1 centimeter or 1.5 centimeters wide. I used different widths so that they might fit better depending on where on the chest they ended up going. I also folded them all in half long ways using a scoring tool, a ruler, and the edge of a table. I happened to have some tracing paper, so I used that to trace the designs of the box, lid and sides onto some thin-ish cardboard. The biggest and most crucial part of this project was the paper mache. There's a whole recipe to this. You need to combine water and wallpaper glue until it makes a thick paste. I used masking tape to preliminarily hold the box together at the corners before covering the whole thing in brown paper and paper mache glue. To do this, you need to dip a narrow strip of paper into the glue and then wipe off most of it before putting it onto the box. It's a very sticky and messy process. I started at the corners of the box and then moved on to the rest of it. It doesn't matter too much about the bits of paper being lined up, just as long as they cover all of the base cardboard. As well as adding structural integrity to the whole project, I liked that it added a wooden look, just like the actual chest would be made out of. I made sure to cover both the outside and the inside of the box, especially the corners, with paper mache. I repeated the process on the box of the chest. I also added, and then paper mache'd over, an extra lip of cardboard around the inside of the box of the chest, so that the lid could sit neatly on it. The dampness of the paper mache made the box bow a little, so I put lots of rubber bands around it to try to hold its shape while it dried. After the box had dried, I used PVA glue to glue the table onto the base of the box. I used rubber bands again to hold the whole thing in place while it dried. While that was drying, I traced out the boots onto medium thickness cardboard. I added a little extra length to one side of the legs so that I could attach it to the box. Once cut out, it should look like this once it's attached to the box. I again used masking tape to hold the boots onto the legs and then reinforced them with paper mache. While that was all drying, it was time to make the hinges. It was handy that the reference picture looks like the hinges are on the outside of the chest because that just makes the whole thing easier to achieve. I cut out 4 shapes which I swear work perfectly to make hinges. One looks like a capital I and the other looks like a capital O, so you need 2 I's and 2 O's to make 2 hinges. I then wrapped the I around a wooden skewer to make a rolled fold and did the same with the O. When folded in half, they matched together to make the hinges. I also made sure that a wooden skewer could go through in between because that will hold the whole hinge together. I cut 2 sections of wooden skewer to match the width of the hinges. I then carefully lined them up with each other on the lid and the box of the chest, used masking tape to hold them in place and paper mache to secure. Similarly with the lock catch, I cut the shape into a mirror image of itself with a gap in between onto medium thickness cardboard. I cut 2 5mm gaps out of the in-between part of the 2 lock catches. I then rolled it over the wooden skewer. While it was folded over, I cut out the lock details so that it would match with itself perfectly, including using a hole punch to make the keyhole. I then used PVA glue to glue it together. I cut a narrower O shape out of medium thickness cardboard, rolled it over a skewer and glued it to itself to make the other half of the hinge for the catch lock. I then used glue and paper mache to attach the hinge to the lid, but not the lock yet. Finally, the fun and slightly more easy step, painting. I painted the lock and the filigree details with gold foil paint. I decided to go with gold foil paint because it looks more metallic than normal acrylic paint for this project. I also lined up all the strips of cardboard, used masking tape to hold them in place, and painted them all with the same gold foil paint. I did a base coat of white gesso over the entire chest before using hunter green acrylic paint over it. I did 2 coats of plain hunter green paint before adding dimension with other colours of paint. I used a combination of hunter green and black around all of the edges of the box and lid where the gold edging is going to go. I decided that it would be a good idea to add weathering before I added the gold details. I used an electric blue on wet hunter green paint to make a lighter worn look under where the moon details will go. I painted the legs of the chest with the same gold foil paint first, with a few coats. I made sure to get it from every angle. I also painted the belly of the chest with the gold foil paint, similar to the reference pictures. Not that you can see the underbelly of the Gilded Chests in the game.
I couldn't possibly make the extra dimension that the chest legs have in the game, so I decided to use a combination of different browns, coppers and golds to try to paint on the shape that the chest legs have in the game. To add the barring to the chest, I mostly laid the cardboard strips against where I wanted them to go and cut it to size. I cut little teeny weeny snips when it needed to go around the corners on the box of the chest on the uprights, but it was mostly a bit of trial and error to make them all look as seamless as possible. I used PVA glue to hold the strip in place and had one half of the strip on the outside and the other on the inside of the chest, so that it was sturdy. I held the cardboard in place for a few minutes until the glue was tacky, and then held it in place with lots and lots of clips while it dried. You can't have too many clips in this part of the process. I also used tissue to wipe away excess glue because it would have been visible when it dried. Adding the decorations to the chest was the most fun part. I compared to the reference photo and glued them in place as similarly as I could, again using clips to hold it in place when I could. After I had added the swirls on the box, I went in with the same browns and coppers from the legs to try to add a more worn metallic look to the design. After I had glued the moons onto the lid, I used a reference picture and painted on the little details that I could not possibly have achieved with the cardboard. Because I love to make things look perfectly finished, I decided to put a felt lining inside the chest. This was also to help hide the paper mache holding everything together. I traced the pattern from making the lid on the box onto black felt and cut it out. Once it's sewn together, it would look like this. I sprayed PVA glue around the edges of the lid and the box of the chest, and then carefully fitted this felt inside. I then used lots of clips to hold it in place while it dried. I painted the ends of the little pieces of wooden skewer with gold and dipped the end in glue. I then lined up the two halves of the hinges on the chest and pushed the segment of skewer through. It was a little tricky to get the second one through, but it was very satisfying. I used the same method to attach the lock catch to its hinge.
Down by the river where the willows weep, secrets of the old ones the waters keep. Starlight dances on the silver stream, lost inside a waking dream. Oh, to see the sun again, let the weary journey end. In my heart a hopeful cry, oh, I want to live, not die.
These boots have seen everything. Ta-da! My little gilded chest. Isn't it cute? So, I don't remember if I filmed it, but I decided to add little, what do we call these? Welding nuts, for lack of a better word. I don't know what they're actually called, onto the corners of the box. And I think that really added to the made of wood and metal look that I was going for. Overall, I'm really happy with how this gilded chest turned out. I just love it. It makes me smile every time I see it. There are some little things that I'm not wholly happy with, but I also don't really know how to fix. One is the lid being a little bit too big. I suppose that's down to measurements or just how the proverbial cookie crumbles. I'm also not the biggest fan of there being a gap in between the box and the lid at the back with the hinges, but that's another thing that I don't know how to fix or to change if I made it another time. There are definitely some imperfections, but I think it's wonderful and the perfect unique trinket from Baldur's Gate 3. So thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!